My name is Brian Abbott, and I'm the founder of 310Antiques.com. So we're going to talk a little bit about Militaria today and what makes an item that falls into that category valuable. How does the value add up? Because as with all antiques and collectibles, there's different aspects to value. So in front of us right now is here's a sword. I'm going to unhook the frog here from the sword, which is what attaches the sword to the belt. And show you a sword. So this is a model 1852 United States Naval Officer's sword. And this is Spanish-American War era, this particular one. Has the original leather belt with it and the frog with the original belt buckle there, two-piece belt buckle. And the scabbard and the swords inside, really nicely decorated sword blade. And it tells you up near the top here, near the hilt, it says Army and Navy Cooperative Company, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we know that that's the company that retailed this sword. The back is stamped proved up here near the top, and I think that indicates that this is the blade was of European origin, that particular part of the sword. This is the portopee hanging off the side here. It's nice to have that as an original part with the sword also. And then you've got your wire-wrapped shark or ray skin handle up here, which is nicely intact also. One of the good things about this sword, and when we start talking about adding value, all of these elements, the portopee, having the original scabbard, the original belt and buckle, that all those things add up. But in this you have a George A. Wilcox engraved, actually acid etched into the blade here. So this sword was made for that gentleman, or at least custom etched with his name. Some people would say engraved, but it's actually an etching. So we can take the age of the sword, Spanish-American War era, probably 1890s, 1900, that time frame, and this gentleman's name, and know that he's a naval officer, and we can begin determining, maybe with some reasonable certainty, who this fellow was and what he did. And his service record, if we can kind of get there, or whether we can get there with documentation from the family or what have you, will potentially add value too. Was he involved in any naval conflicts? Were those conflicts of historical significance? And did he participate in a way that added historical significance? And if that's true, that would add value to this piece. So we've got a sword that may be worth $800 or $1,200, something like that. But if it becomes aligned with this name, and we know it's him, his name's on the sword blade, and maybe through documentation from the family, we know that he owned it and he was involved in something significant. Instead of $8 to $12, maybe it's $3,500 to $4,500 or something like that. That's an example of adding value to a piece of Militaria. Here's an unusual piece of Militaria, and an example of where we've got documentation that, really good documentation that tells us where this is from. I bought this in an estate in the San Fernando Valley years ago from a pilot's wife, and there was a lot of interesting items. All kinds of interesting items, great items actually in Militaria. And here's one that I've just never done anything with. It's just been sitting in a box, but it's what's known as a Japanese meatball flag. So I'm going to hold it up. I'll cover myself a little bit holding it up, but there's a Japanese silk meatball flag. You can see the writing all around the edge of the flag. Now that's probably by family members or unit members, people that he was worked with in the war. And at the bottom of this meatball flag, what makes it unusual is that it is marked, drawn on the flag, 945th AAA, which is your anti-aircraft unit, which we find out is the anti-aircraft unit that shot down this person's plane. It's highly unusual. So here we have a flag that's, almost certainly, attributable to probably to a specific pilot. And then we have a piece of provenance here, a piece of paper framed that states, going back in my old diary, found that on June the 5th, 1945, the meatball, which is what this flag's called, was taken off a Jap VAL Navy dive bomber, which was the Jap version of the German Stuka. The place was Tacloban in the South Philippines. And it's signed by this gentleman, and I haven't taken the time to figure out who he was. But it's signed and dated the 7th of January, 1976. And then it's notarized, and it's notarized from the United States, I don't remember, but a military college of some kind. So you've got pretty concrete provenance here, and it's almost, certainly if it was in this man's diary, then he was probably almost certainly a member of that anti-aircraft unit. A meatball flag's not necessarily terribly valuable. A plain meatball flag may be worth maybe $70 or $150, something like that, right? But a meatball flag inscribed by the unit that the Japanese pilot was in is more valuable, maybe twice as valuable. Then when we have the anti-aircraft unit that shot him down has signed the flag, and then we've got actual provenance. You can see where it all adds up to. This flag concretely came off of a Japanese VAL bomber that was downed in the Philippines, and we know where in the Philippines and by what unit. It becomes much more valuable and much more interesting to a Militaria collector, a World War II Militaria collector. This came from the same estate. It's probably not related. Who knows? It could be. I've shown this to a couple of guys because our office is at an airport, actually. They're not quite sure what it is, but it has a compass on it. It's definitely a Japanese Second World War instrument from a Japanese military plane. It may be a part of a bomb site. It may be simply a wind speed indicator, but it doesn't have a compass on it, which kind of suggests differently, and it rotates on here and there, makes different settings. It's not 100% sure what it is, but highly probable it's a bomb site or some type of navigational instrument from a Japanese World War II plane. Again, an interesting piece, but there's some research that needs to be done before we can say for sure what this particular piece is. The last example I'll give of what adds value to a piece of militaria or a group of militaria is what we call a Civil War grouping that I've got here. This is only part of the grouping, but it's a good part of it. This consists of a photograph, enlistment papers, a veteran's medal, a Grand Army of the Republic kepi, and then 2 reunion ribbons. The photograph is an ambrotype, which dates it to a specific period of time. Give or take, 20 years or so. We can see from the photograph that this man's in uniform, and clearly, this is, most likely taken during the Civil War. It is an ambrotype of a cavalry officer, and the insignia from the unity is clearly visible. And he is loaded with the type of items you want to see in a photograph like that. He has his cavalry hat on. He has his sword in his hand. He has a what appears to be, maybe a riding crop in his other hand. He has a pistol in his belt. He's wearing gauntlets. All of these items, they all add value to a military photograph from the Civil War. Every little thing you can put in there that is war related adds value. And then, we have his enlistment papers. So You've got his ambrotype, his enlistment papers, his veteran's badge, and incidentally, the veteran's badge is numbered, which is pretty neat because the numbered veteran's badge means that you can trace it specifically to that exact veteran. It certainly was this gentleman here. And then his kepi, the Grand Army of the Republic, as I mentioned it earlier. The Grand Army of the Republic was the Veterans Association of Union Civil War veterans. So they belonged to GAR, or the Grand Army of the Republic. Confederate veterans was the UCV, United Confederate Veterans. But this is a good example of a good grouping of Civil War memorabilia where any one item on its own would have some value, but collectively all of these items, and the fact that we know who this individual was and who owned all of these items add a great deal of value in this case. And it's an interesting group, and so that's what you're looking for in Militaria, really. You want... we want to know whose it was, who owned it, and hopefully what the unit did and what have you. You know, as much information as possible. The more, the better.